So right now, the SOC of today, let me delineate between an outsourced SOC provider versus an enterprise SOC that you would see inside of a company. So an outsourced SOC is a company that is responsible for the log aggregation, the detection, to some extent, the containment, operations around monitoring, your digital ecosystem. Traditionally, you're going to see everything from, your general endpoint servers and, to some extent, your cloud applications. And you're starting to see more and more moving into things like sensors, Internet of Things, to some extent, ecosystems that contain, say, machine learning.
Very good, very good. Well, I guess that means it depends on the perspective you're coming from, what your SOC's going to look like. Is it an IoT SOC? Is it an executive protection SOC? What type of SOC? Jordan, can we even have a definition of today's SOC? Is that even possible?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to so many MSSPs and clients and customers that have just so many different variations of a SOC. I mean, like you mentioned before, there's kind of the joint SOC, the hybrid SOC, the NOC. Personally, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with any of those variations. They all serve very valuable business purposes. They have to fit the business correctly, but they're all perfectly valid models. Does there have to be a single definition for a SOC? Honestly, I don't think so. I think it will be hard for us to nail down really anything that encapsulates all of them that's not super general. Okay,
I like it. Well, Ali, you come from an MSP background. So is there an MSP SOC or a managed SOC that exists today that we can seek and define? Because we want to look at what the SOC of the future is going to be like, especially for the managed service. But what's the SOC of the today look like for you?
So really good comments, first of all, by Jordan and Jenai, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly. The perspective I can bring in, and I have a relatively narrower perspective, maybe not as much expertise as some on the panel do, but there are a couple of really important cybersecurity global, well, one is a global standard and the other is a emerging national standard. The first one from a global perspective is high trust. I don't know how many on the panel or audience may be familiar with high trust, but high trust integrates a lot of the security capabilities, if you will, across security requirements across many different global as well as US federal and state mandates. So that's one piece of it. And the other one being the newer standard from the Department of Defense, CMMC, which I think is going to have a ripple effect on other industries as well. So and there are 5 levels that are defined in that. So I think when one looks at SOC, one of the things, at least a perspective is, what are the minimal capabilities, if you will, that this SOC has to deliver and provide support for? And it's I think something that organizations have to look at very closely. And clients and customers, I think where the pressure is going to be coming in from is that clients and customers may in the future be asking the question, is this SOC aligned with, for example, level 3 or level 4 of the CMMC standard, DoD standard? And that kind of sets the bar for the SOC at a certain level. So I think that's something just to think about, one perspective.
No, I like it, and as we had before with Stan, Stahl, and Kenji, standardization is sometimes not lacking, but like, do you latch on to a military standard? Do you latch on to a European standard? It's a big question. Zeeshan, do you think that in this pandemic, this virtual SOC or SOC as a service, is that going to be flavor of the month? Because there's a lot of service providers out there wondering, oh no, I've just lost my business or my revenue's down. I know this is what I'm going to go for. Is this that thing they're looking for?
I'm going to give the board and the CEO perspective because we advise a lot of boards, and then the CIO perspective because it's somebody who's laying down the track as fast as possible in Newman. I don't think so. I think the key to keep in mind for MSS providers is what is the value that the SOC is generating. If it's just a reactive SOC, and it could be on a standard or whatever, but really it looks at maybe a lateral movement thing and questions it down or whatever, those conversations and those descriptions of SOC, there could be many descriptions like that. Those are esoteric. So in terms of language of communication for value add and continuing the contract or garnering a new contract, I think it's just not going to resonate beyond the director or the VP level for our company in terms of the buy decision. That's when I see you on the board. But I just came from a 4-hour board session, and the conversation topic there is, are you providing me value in terms of keeping telemetry where there might be a problem happening because my workers, many of them, the white collar job ones, are now working from home, and whatever it is that the CIO told me that they're doing, which is VPNing or whatever, but they've got files on their desktop. So can you tell me if they do something wrong with those files? Can the SOC tell me that? Can you tell me if somebody's stealing that stuff? Can the SOC tell me that? So that the translated into technical speak is, am I keeping telemetry on the movement of companies? Who comes in and who goes out? So there's the value statement right there. The other one is, we understand that we're spending some money on SOC. And we know that if I ask the question from the CIO or the CISO, are we secure? They're gonna kind of stressfully say, well, not really, or maybe yes, but until the next thing comes around. So I get all that. But can a SOC provide me support in terms of incident response in a way when, let's say, a ransomware happens, that the SOC is not affected and they can become the hub of communication and response because they're using other systems outside of my company systems that are all down now during this ransomware attack, number one. And number two, can the SOC provide forensic or other investigation support with the collateral they are capturing? And that capturing almost, they're imagining, so you see, it may not be happening, but in their imagination, they're thinking that somehow the SOC has separated the zones of concern in terms of keeping evidence outside of the company systems. They're thinking there's some cloud out there and the SOC must have preservation of information and a chain of custody. So when we have everything deleted or encrypted or not backed up, well, the SOC's still gonna have all that information. So we're just gonna go there and say, can you please pull up the information on what happened and what were the logs right before we crashed or ransomware attack? So you can actually take these expectations that they have unsaid, maybe sometimes not translated, and then you can say, well, the SOC will provide incident support, forensic and legal support, coordination and communication during an attack. And then on an ongoing basis, when none of that is happening, it's providing you a picture in time of your compliance requirement, could be HITRUST, could be CMMC. It's looking at what the risk posture is. And then it's providing telemetry on behavior of users going in and out of different domains.
Well, that's a big ask for the SOC of the future. It can do many things, and why not if that's what indeed we need. But you raise a good question, because up until now, and I'll go to Dr. Akshay now. We've been, I don't know, treated to sparkly boxes that give us information, and you could therefore say notifications. Is the future of the SOC a proactive phase? Is it mitigation now and actually doing something about it? Or is that a problem when you've got something outsourced? I don't know. Are we moving from reactive to proactive? Or actually, what do you think?
Regardless of where you go, it's about understanding the behavior of the attack or behavior of the threat itself. That's sort of what I'm focused on, and the research that we do is focused on understanding the attributes that make up these threats. So whether it is the centers that are here today or the solutions you're providing for the future, these things will change in real time. How adaptive are you to those changes? And sure, the compliance standards and all that, but those are basic things. Those are prerequisites to play the game. They're really not a certificate. because without those, you just won't be able to work in that space. So any compliance issue that comes into play, all of them will have to do it, or they will not have that business. Now, check that box off. What is next? What is going to set these people apart from all the other competition? First of all, price. If you come up to a price point where it's not affordable and the actual lawsuit is cheaper, it's not going to work. You will see CISOs that make that call. Okay? It's actually better to be sued at this point than spend all this money. In terms of understanding behavior, these threats have multiple meaning to an organization, not just in the cyber sense, but what is the actual larger security threat landscape and how it's shared. Those kind of things will start to play a big role. As we see, and this is not that big of a difference, it's just the threat has evolved over to the network side. But it's very traditional in any type of threat, whether it's criminological. So there's a lot of studies that are being done on similar model, but now you take the threat index that comes through the networks. We are changing behavior all the time. Just now, kids are getting all these laptops. They're going to be sitting at home. Schools have signed this thing saying you will not download anything. You're talking to a 5-year-old kid, right? And the parents are not supposed to be there. So, but the kid is by themselves. So who's the trusted? Who's the person who's in charge of it, right? Is it managed? Is it being interned? Is it a hybrid? These questions are going to change on a regular basis as the emerging technologies, adoption of technology, integration of 5G, IoT. This is a big field. And I think nobody can really, a lot of experts are speaking from their past and predicting the future, but this is going to be a collaborative solution going forward. And at least with what we do at IRI and other university and research centers that I'm working at, because I do have one of my legs in the private side of things. I sit on the board of many companies and also on the academic side. What I'm focused on is being able to map out the threats in those domains and try to find a left of boom indicator, boom meaning an event trigger, and proactive threat mitigation before in the left zone, and in the timeline right of forensic to understand where did you go wrong and try to adopt that. And that is also where we introduce AI, the role of AI in these organizations and how they operate machine learning going forward.
I like it, and everyone should go to the Left of Boom conference. We'll put links for that, and you can talk about it later. But you said at the beginning, attribution, and I like that because that ties into my next question, which I'd like to ask Jenai. If we sort out attribution and we sort out detection, surely the SOC of the future can be trusted with response. Or is it the limit of a managed security service? Because in end effect, you're going to deliver a kinetic response through a third party. All right, no, that's a military thing. But you're going to deliver some sort of response. Can you trust a third party with responding if you figured out attribution and detection?
And just to add there, what about the third party to the third party? Right, there are many folks that are using another group or partner group, so you're now getting multiple layers into this. So the question is, especially when you're looking at compliance, whatever, even including California, where does the accountability and the responsibility sit? And this will not really be determined by some of the company owners. They'll be determined by the lawyers, right? Because it comes down to actual numbers, dollars and cents at the table.
All right,
well, run for profit.
Let's put that to Jenai. Have we discovered the edge of space in the world of MSS?
It depends on what your tolerance for risk, might be. So as an example, I certainly wouldn't be extending that type of power to an MSSP if I were dealing with 4.9 or 5.9 systems and or life safety systems as an example. Because the risk of offering containment capabilities to a third party there is simply too great. If I'm dealing with something where the risk might be a little bit less, and I trust that the MSSP has the appropriate set of containment controls in place and can validate, then I might be willing to give up that risk. But it has to be based on the company's tolerance for risk.
And so what would a SOC of the future remediation even look like?
Remediation or containment?
No, remediation, because we can entrust them to stop something, but what would remediation look like?
So that becomes difficult, right? Because now we're going from the world of cybersecurity and we're going into things like IT operations and DevOps. You know, so if the MSSP of the future is, you know, offers DevSecOps like capabilities and, you know, of which remediation is part of that, then that's one thing. You know, but traditionally, those are two separate groups, two separate functions, and so you wouldn't see the SOC of the future actually doing, you know, remediation just yet.
Okay. Yeah, I suppose it's a big distilled chain of custody. And so, Jordan, can that be the SOC of the future, or will it forever remain on that border?
I mean, I think the distinction comes between in-house and outsourced, right? There are just some things that you shouldn't outsource. I am a big fan of MSSPs. I used to work for an MSSP. My clients are MSSPs. But I will say this, MSSPs have most MSSPs, not all, certainly have a limited range of value when it comes to certain sizes and types of operations. So I think the same applies for even remediation or response to any degree, right? You really have to, it's just too complex and nuanced of a topic to really make a broad generalization on. But, you know, is it possible? Could it be done? Absolutely. I think there's nothing stopping us really from pioneering these changes. I think we should explore these options. It's just a question of whether or not it's profitable, and I think that's ultimately kind of the question.
Well, okay, that's nice, because profitability. Ali, would it be profitable to bundle some sort of, I don't know, very professional, I'm loath to say military grade, every time someone says military grade, people do a facepalm, very professional outsourced SOC? Would it even be possible to bundle it to an SMB? Or are they just not interested? I think you're on mute, Ali.
Yeah, sorry. That's a difficult question, you know, especially when you look at the small, medium-sized businesses from a cost perspective. I think one of the points that Jenai had said earlier about your risk tolerance, and I think that becomes really important. And typically small to medium-sized businesses do struggle to find that balance, if you will, with respect to the costs associated with the broader cybersecurity space and what's in-house. To Jordan's point, what's in-house, what's outsourced to the SOC. And I think if, going back to my earlier point, if you look at some of the updates that have been made to the standards that are out there, for example, in NIST Cybersecurity Framework version 1.1, they've added a new category in the identify function for the cybersecurity supply chain. And I forget which one of the panelist members had talked about going from one, you know, you may be working with a multiple suite. We had a client that was moving data from the US to India, and the Indian operation out of Chennai was actually outsourcing that to a location in Manila, Philippines. So that, you know, where do you set the bar, if you will, for the minimal capabilities associated with it? And back to your point, Philip, in terms of the cost associated with that. And then when you look at the cost, what's now the impact on the risk factor when you are moving it further downstream from the original source?
I like it. I like it. And we've got a comment, not from the audience, but Jordan in the chat has actually produced an interesting question, which we'll put to Zeeshan then. When we're talking about the SOC of the future, are we actually already talking about MDR? And is there a clear distinction between MDR, CASB, SOC, or, you know, managed SOC? And in fact, it's not the SOC of the future we're looking for. We're trying to bundle everything into the SOC, but it already exists in fragmented form. Is that right, Zeeshan? Are you on mute, Zeeshan?
Sorry, yeah, to some degree, but I think the translation of what MDR means just needs to be written out on top of the advertisement and saying we'll also stop the problem or something to that effect. But on the broader level, in me practically implementing things like this, what this looks like, I'll get right down to brass tacks. What this looks like is a Visio chart, and then 2 people internally that usually serve the role of security analyst and engineer that have a part-time as needed role assigned to be the response party. And then the help desk is also enrolled into this, or the desk side support. And then there is a tool like ServiceNow, which has, they call them multi-provider partition sharing. So what this looks like is a SOC from outside detects an incident. Let's say that they have an MDR possibility as well, where it can shut down a computer, shut down a network port, and so on and so forth. But there's only so far they can go because there's a chain of custody issue and there's a separation of concerns issue. Right? We're still not talking about remotely hiring people because of visa issues and not being able to take them through criminal checks yet because they happen to be in India or whatever, and the criminal justice system doesn't provide. We're not talking about that. Let's just say that there's a separation of duties. So when an incident does happen and a minimal response has been taken by the MDR, then the next thing that happens is a case file is opened into, let's say, a case management system, and then a task goes out with what has been done so far. And these 2 people who are internal to the company, who've been told that you might be called upon to change your jobs when a problem happens, they get a call, and now their response starts. They now need to physically go in. Now they're on the payroll of the company and leave their other job for a moment and now provide the response capabilities. They need to confiscate the computer or computers. They need to go turn off the switch, or they need to go and talk to the media department and all those things, right? So it's not an all or nothing thing. It's a matter of having the Visio chart, advertising clearly how the response is happening, what part the MSSP is going to play, which is the remote scripts. They have very little ability to run on companies' stuff, right? Otherwise, they will become the IT operations team, like I heard before from Jenai. So they don't want to become the IT operations team, but they have a clear thing. We will do these 4 things. And then here's your internal folks, which you must identify ahead of time as you get into this contract. They will then go out and do these 15 things, right? And in practice, it works if you have the tool, if you have the chart, clear roles and responsibilities defined. And then, you know, quite honestly, there's a lot of legal problems and issues here as well. And they need to be taken seriously by the internal legal counsel and chief risk officer. So all the MSSP can do is have, you know, the little 6-point, if you would, disclaimer that, and in addition to that, as a value add, well, maybe just remind you that you must consider all these things internally as you go through these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you get into the interesting area of offensive services, which many companies don't want to touch with a barge pole. Because
I'd love to actually hear from somebody about it, because apart from the United States military at this point, or under the auspices, I don't think the companies are actually allowed to launch counterattacks just yet, right? And if you send it to the FBI, they're not going to really respond to you. They'll take the information in.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, on that prickly point then, Akshay, what can the public sector SOC universe realistically teach the private sector SOC universe, given that we're trying to combine MSS, MSP, and end users in this conference? What lessons can the public sector teach them?
Nothing by itself. It's a public-private collaboration that will be needed. Teaching anything in silo in a world that doesn't operate in a silo, it's not going to work. So, and you know, it's used as a buzzword, but how practical is it, right? So in the last 3 months, there's 4 companies that have joined proposals with us on projects, and it's not always easy coordinating this. It's a very taxing job. So trying to get, because private sector and public sector do not work at the same pace. Most people left one or didn't go into one for that very reason. So trying to get an alignment in this is the big challenge. And also, as we mentioned in the earlier talk, how do you get operators? How do you get people who are in there to come in into this and say, this is the ground truth. This is what we face in that reality. It's a fine dance, right? And to be able to do that successfully, I don't know how many organizations can pull it through. And the other factor is, right now, things are always great initially, and we talked about outsourcing and all the things that are happening. Well, that's what's keeping the prices low, right? At one point, why is it that these services are better to be offloaded? Because there is more efficiency and it's able to do it. But where does that break? And where does that come into a point? It's almost the same price. Do we do it here or there? So there's multiple factors depending on what you're talking about. And all of those things will matter. So there's no such thing as, hey, here, this is what's going to happen. Here's top 8 things that the future will be designed by. It's an ongoing process. And all the people that are here, plus this, many of your audience members, this group collectively will have the solution. But again, it is not going to happen in silos. And academics by itself, yeah, sure, we can do a lot of research. We can put things out on past work and start projecting. But AI is going to change all this. There's so much automation coming in. We're always looking at the stuff. What is that going to do? Sure, we said there's no attack. Fine. But how does an AI respond to defense, right? Is it by shutting down the matrix that's coming in? All those will determine what happens.
Deep. And that's what we need. That's what we're trying to do in this conference. We're trying to have an output, an outcome. We're trying to have thoughtful conversations. But we are sadly out of time. It's really run away with us. I'd love to go around again, but why don't we go around to thank Dr. Akshay Pottathil, Jenai Marinkovic, Jordan Camba, Ali Pabrai, and Zeeshan Kazmi for a fantastic panel. Please give them a wonderful round of applause. I really enjoyed it, and I think we'll have to invite you to our SOC of the Future specific event because that will now enable us to think about it a bit more. Wonderful. Leanne's saying thank you and clapping, and Stefan's still clapping. That's really good. Yeah, thank you everyone.
And we owe a big thank you to you, Phil, for coordinating all of us. Yeah. We are all a little crazy.
You know, Phil, it's we all get to take a break every now and then. You've been sitting there nonstop asking these questions and keeping point on balance, and staying on point is not an easy job, and all of us know that from our job.
If I were in your chair, I'd be mixing Baileys with my coffee right now.
I do have coffee.
That is not coffee.
All right, I'll catch you all soon, and we're going to move on to the topic of medicine, which might be very useful right about now.
Okay, take care. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.